Brenda Whitmore's hand came over my fence at 6:18 in the morning and snapped 3 peaches off my tree. The HOA garden chair stood on the other side with a wicker basket on her hip, stealing my fruit like she had a receipt. My irrigation timer clicked behind me, feeding the same private drip line that kept half the corner landscaping alive during county water restrictions. 2 neighbors slowed their morning walk and watched like this was normal. Then Brenda reached higher, broke a branch, and dropped it into my yard with the soft crack of green wood. That was her first real mistake. The second was the HOA notice taped to my gate. Fresh ink. Blue logo. Community harvest concern. The paper smelled like rain and toner, and it accused me of creating an attractive nuisance by growing fruit too close to a shared visual corridor. Shared. That word sat on the page like a thumbprint. I looked past it and saw Brenda lift another peach, polish it on her sleeve, and smile at me through the slats. "Morning, Ethan," she said. "You really should be more generous with the neighborhood." I didn't answer right away. The sprinklers hissed along the stone border. Bees moved through the lavender. The morning sun hit the peaches and made them glow like little lanterns. My backyard was quiet except for her basket knocking against the fence. Knock, 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 like she was counting what she thought she owned. "My name is Ethan Walker. I design residential landscapes for a living. Not golf courses, not corporate plazas. Real yards. Soil, grading, drainage, irrigation, fruit trees, pollinator beds, the whole living system." That backyard was my test garden and my breathing room. Every valve was labeled. Every bed had its own zone. Every plant was there because I chose it. Brenda knew that. She had complained about all of it for months. The peach tree was too rustic. The paraspalier was too farm-looking. The raised beds made the subdivision feel less upscale. But somehow, every Saturday morning, her basket got heavier. She never took fallen fruit. She took the best ones. The ones I bagged against birds. The ones my hands had thinned in spring so the branches would not split in July heat. She took them while wearing white gardening gloves and that stiff HOA polo with her name embroidered over the heart. The first time I asked her to stop, she laughed. Not loud. Worse. Small and polished. "Ethan, anything leaning into community view is part of the community experience." Then she turned to the walking group and said, "Some people move here and forget how neighborhoods work." The women beside her looked at my fence, then at my hands, then away. That silence told me more than her words did. This was not about peaches. It was permission. Brenda had been training the block to treat my property like her display shelf. That morning, she pushed it further. She pulled a small folding step stool from behind my trash enclosure. My step stool. She must have reached over and dragged it through the side gap before I came outside. Metal scraped concrete. The sound cut clean through the sprinkler hiss. She opened it under the fence line and climbed 1 step higher. "Careful," I said. She froze for half a second. "Excuse me. That branch won't hold your weight." Her smile hardened. Her knuckles tightened around the basket handle. "Maybe if you maintained your plants properly, the HOA wouldn't need to intervene." Then she yanked the branch down anyway. Leaves shook. A peach fell and split open on the pavers. Sweet juice spread into the dust. Ants found it almost immediately. Across the street, Mr. Holloway stopped beside his mailbox. 2 houses down, someone's garage door paused halfway open. The whole cul-de-sac had gone still. Brenda saw them watching. That made her braver. She raised her voice. "This is exactly why the board discussed your yard last night." I looked at the notice again. Last night. No meeting announcement. No email. No agenda. Just a morning theft dressed up as neighborhood policy. The irrigation controller clicked again behind me. Zone 3 shut off. Zone 4 opened. Water began moving under the pepper bed I had not planted yet. Brenda didn't notice the empty row beside the peaches. She only saw what she wanted to take. Then she said the line that changed everything. "If you won't share voluntarily, we'll make it official." I folded the notice once and put it in my pocket. That was when this stopped being about fruit. Brenda stood there another few seconds after she said it. Not moving. Not leaving. Just holding her basket and waiting for me to argue. That seemed to be part of the routine. She pushed. Somebody reacted. Then she became the reasonable one. I looked at the branch hanging low over the fence and picked up the split peach from the pavers. Warm from the sun. Sticky across my fingers. I set it on the edge of my raised bed and walked back toward the controller box without another word. Behind me, I heard her laugh once. Short. Confident. By noon, the neighborhood Facebook group had already done the rest. Somebody posted a photo, not of Brenda taking fruit, of my yard. Caption: Community concerns over unmanaged harvesting and visual obstruction. 43 comments in 2 hours. Most people stayed careful. Safe language. Questions. A few supported me quietly. Then Brenda showed up in the comments and started using words like access, neighborhood harmony, shared appearance. She never said ownership. That part mattered. I closed the app and went outside. Heat sat low over the yard. The gravel radiated through my boots. The drip system clicked through its afternoon cycle with that soft ticking sound I always liked. The garden looked normal from a distance. Stone path, trellises, fruit trees, lavender border. But once you worked with landscapes long enough, you stopped seeing plants and started seeing behavior. Growth patterns, pressure points. What spreads? What survives? What takes more than it gives back? I walked the fence line. Brenda had not just taken fruit. Her stool left dents in the mulch. Her shoes crushed 2 irrigation emitters. One branch had bark peeled halfway around where she pulled too hard. Small damage. But intentional damage always looks different. It leaves confidence behind. At the side gate, I found something else. A zip tie. White. Fresh. Attached to my fence latch. Loose enough not to lock it. Tight enough to show someone had measured it. I stared at it for a second longer than I meant to. Then I noticed matching white tags farther down. 3 of them. Utility marker style. Tiny. Easy to miss. Someone had marked sections of my fence. Not city markings. Not contractor markings. Too neat. Too selective. My phone buzzed. Message from Holloway across the street. Keep an eye out. They walked your yard line after dark. No greeting. No explanation. Just that. I looked over. His garage door was cracked 6 inches open. He disappeared before I could wave. The air felt different after that. Not dangerous. Organized. I spent the next hour checking irrigation pressure, replacing emitters, trimming broken growth. Work settles the mind. You touch enough soil, and things become simple again. Then I reached the empty bed beside the peaches. 30 feet long. Full sun. Separate water zone. Rich soil. Nothing planted yet. I crouched and pressed my hand into the dirt. Cool underneath. Perfect conditions. My supplier had texted me 2 days earlier about an unusual pepper shipment arriving ahead of schedule. I had ignored it at the time. Now I opened the message again and looked at the photo. Bright red. Wrinkled skin. Small warning label at the bottom. I smiled once and locked my phone. Then I noticed someone watching from Brenda's upstairs window. The curtain moved back into place before I could tell who had been standing there. I stayed in the yard another minute anyway. No wave. No second look. Just the low hum of air conditioners and the smell of hot mulch heating under the afternoon sun. I picked up the white marker from the fence and rolled it between my fingers. No logo. No writing. Just clean plastic and a tiny adhesive pad. Temporary. Deliberate. I dropped it into my pocket and went inside. By 6 that evening, the neighborhood had already turned the story into something cleaner than theft. The Facebook post was gone, replaced with an announcement. Community Beautification Walkthrough. Saturday. Hosted by Brenda Whitmore. Optional attendance encouraged. My address was listed first. I stared at the screen and laughed once through my nose. Optional. That word did a lot of work around here. I made dinner. Chicken. Rice. Nothing complicated. I ate standing at the counter and looked out the kitchen window toward the garden. The peach tree looked smaller than usual. Not because of the fruit. Because now I could see where people had decided my fence ended and their opinions began. At 7:14, my irrigation app sent a pressure alert. Zone 4. Minor interruption. I walked outside. Warm air. Cicadas. Orange sky settling over the rooftops. The garden lights had started coming on 1 row at a time. I followed the line to the side bed and stopped. Someone had turned one emitter completely open. Water pooled slowly across the empty section. Not enough to flood. Enough to waste. Enough to force adjustment. That took intention. Most people do not even know emitters twist. I shut it off and checked the others. 2 more had been adjusted. Not random. All around the empty bed. I stood up and looked across the fence. Brenda was watering decorative shrubs with one hand and scrolling her phone with the other. She glanced over and smiled immediately. Too fast. Everything okay over there? She asked. Her voice floated over the fence sweet as artificial vanilla. I nodded. Just maintenance. She smiled wider. Good. We would hate for things to get out of control. Then she turned away before I answered. I looked back down at the empty row. 30 feet. Full sun. Separate valve. Separate schedule. Separate visibility from the street. A weird thing happens when you build landscapes long enough. You stop asking who did something. You start asking why that exact spot. I went into the garage and pulled open my supply cabinet. Fertilizer. Spare valves. Soil probes. Seed trays. My phone sat on the workbench. That message was still there. Premium Carolina Reaper starters available. Limited stock. Pick up this week. I stared at the photo longer this time. Not because of the peppers. Because of the care instructions underneath. Bright color. Attractive shape. Handle carefully. I set the phone down. Then my doorbell camera pinged. Motion detected. Backyard side gate. I opened the feed expecting raccoons. Instead, I watched Brenda standing outside my fence with two women from the HOA board. She pointed directly at the empty bed and said, clear as day, that section would look much better if it produced something worth sharing. I watched the clip 3 times. Then I opened the supplier message again. I picked up the starters Thursday morning. 6 trays. Healthy roots. Tight growth. Bright red labels with more warning text than decoration. The guy at the nursery slid the cart toward me and raised an eyebrow. These are not beginner peppers. I smiled and said they were not for beginners. The drive home smelled like potting soil and warm plastic. Every stoplight made the leaves tremble in their trays. I kept thinking about Brenda standing at my fence explaining my yard to people who had never touched dirt in their lives. Not angry, just precise. Saturday was the beautification walkthrough. That mattered more than the plants. I pulled into the driveway and unloaded slowly. No hiding, no rush. If someone watched, I wanted them to see ordinary gardening. I carried the trays through the side gate. The afternoon heat sat heavy over the stone path. Water hissed under the mulch. Bees moved through the lavender like nothing in the world had changed. I set the peppers into the empty bed and stood back. From the street, they looked decorative. Compact. Clean lines. Bright color. Better presentation than half the flower beds in the neighborhood. I adjusted spacing. 18 inches center to center. Separate drip. Separate valve. Easy to maintain. I added small black markers beside each plant. Botanical name. Heat rating. Care instructions. Not because anyone would read them. Because I always label my work. Halfway through planting, my phone buzzed. HOA email. Community beautification walkthrough reminder. Residents are encouraged to discuss concerns respectfully. Refreshments provided. My house was still listed first. I planted another row. By sunset, the bed looked finished. Intentional. Like it belonged there all along. I cleaned my tools and sat on the patio with iced tea. The garden lights came on one section at a time. Peach tree. Pear wall. Herb border. Then the new bed. The peppers glowed deep red under warm LEDs. Small lanterns. Quiet. Around 8:30, I heard voices outside the fence. Brenda. 2 women. Slow footsteps. I stayed seated. See, Brenda said. This is exactly what I meant. He finally listened. One woman laughed softly. Another asked what the plants were. Brenda answered immediately. Probably ornamental. Ethan likes weird stuff. I looked down at my glass so they would not see me smiling. They moved on after a minute. The next morning I woke before sunrise. Coffee. Cool air. The smell of wet soil. Then I stopped. The side gate was open 2 inches. I always close it. Always. I walked outside. No damage. No missing tools. The peppers looked untouched. But one plant had shifted. Soil disturbed. A marker tilted sideways. Someone had picked it up and put it back. I straightened it and looked across the fence. Brenda's kitchen light was on. She stood at the sink in her robe with her phone raised toward my yard. She lowered it when she saw me. Then she lifted her coffee mug like we were sharing a joke. At 9:02, another HOA post appeared. Community produce exchange coming next weekend. Neighborhood grown items encouraged. Brenda tagged 6 houses. Then she added one more line. Some gardens already look ready. The produce exchange was scheduled for Saturday at noon. Brenda started talking about it like it was a county fair instead of 6 folding tables and store-bought lemonade. Every morning that week, she walked the neighborhood with a clipboard. Every afternoon, she posted reminders. Every evening, she found a reason to stand near my fence. I kept working. Water. Prune. Inspect. Adjust. The peppers settled in fast. Strong stems. Deep color. Clean leaves. The separate irrigation zone held steady. 3 minutes at dawn. 4 at sunset. Enough to keep them happy. Nothing more. Thursday afternoon, I came home and found a laminated sign zip tied to my gate. Community Produce Exchange Participant. Thank you for supporting neighborhood sharing. My address. My yard. My participation. No one had asked. The plastic clicked against the metal every time the wind shifted. I took it down and set it on my patio table. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Brenda. First text she had ever sent me. Hope you do not mind. Your garden is such a great example. I stared at the message and noticed something strange. She attached a photo. My peppers. Close enough to see the labels. That meant she had reached through the fence or leaned over it. I zoomed in. One marker was turned backward. Not an accident. She had handled it. I set the phone down and went outside. Late sunlight made everything look softer than it was. The pepper bed looked untouched until I crouched. 2 fruits missing. Not fully ripe. Snapped early. I touched the stem. Fresh break. Maybe an hour old. No footprints. No branches moved. Clean. Deliberate. I stood up and looked over the fence. Brenda was arranging flowers in decorative pots. She noticed me immediately. Those little red ones are adorable, she said. I told everyone you finally planted something shareable. I nodded once. Did you try one? Her smile widened. No. Yet. Then she laughed like we both understood something. That word stayed with me. Yet. Friday morning, the neighborhood group exploded. Photos. Lists. Who was bringing tomatoes? Cucumbers. Herbs. Someone asked if my garden would be open for sampling. Brenda replied before I could. Ethan loves community engagement. I did not answer. Around lunch, Holloway texted again. One sentence. She has been telling people your yard is featured. I looked outside. 2 women walked slowly past my house and pointed at the peppers. One took a picture. Another laughed and said they looked sweet. Sweet. I almost said something. Instead, I watered the beds and watched. Around sunset, I noticed another change. 3 more peppers gone. Different plants. Somebody was sampling now. Not taking baskets. Testing. Curious. I walked the fence line and found something sitting under the peach tree. A paper plate. Peach pits. Half a pepper. 1 bite missing. I stared at it for a second. Then I looked toward Brenda's house. Her kitchen windows were open. Her voice carried across the yard. Make sure everyone comes early before the good stuff disappears. I left the plate exactly where it was. Saturday was getting closer. Saturday arrived hot and bright. By 8 a.m., folding tables appeared at the end of the cul-de-sac. White canopy tents. Handwritten signs. Somebody brought mason jars of lemonade. Somebody else set out baskets with ribbons tied to the handles. It looked harmless from a distance. That was the strange part. Most things do. I watered early and finished before the neighborhood woke up fully. The peppers looked perfect. Deep red. Smooth skin. Sunlight made them look sweeter than they were. I checked every emitter. Every label. Every stake. Then I added one more thing. Small plant tags beside the front row. Carolina Reaper. Extremely hot. Do not harvest. Black letters. Clean. Easy to read. I pressed each tag firmly into the soil and stepped back. No tricks. No hidden cameras. No surprises. Just labels. Around 9:30, I heard footsteps outside the fence. Slow. Casual. Not trying to hide. I looked through the side window. Brenda was there with 3 women and a tray of pastries. She pointed into my yard while explaining something with both hands. One woman leaned over and laughed. Another took pictures. Brenda nodded toward the pepper bed and said something I could not hear. Then she looked straight toward my house and smiled. They moved on. At 10:12, my phone buzzed. Neighborhood group update. Produce exchange route map. Stop 1. Walker Garden feature display. Feature display. Not participant. Display. I opened the comments. People were already planning which fruits to try first. Someone wrote those little red ones look amazing. Brenda replied with a heart emoji. I closed the app and put my phone face down. By 11 o'clock, the neighborhood noise had changed. More voices. Car doors. Kids running. Folding chairs scraping pavement. I stayed in my backyard trimming basil and pretending not to hear any of it. Then Holloway appeared at the side gate carrying a coffee mug. He looked over the fence once and lowered his voice. You planning to stop this? I clipped another leaf and shook my head. He looked at the peppers. Looked at the signs. Looked back at me. Then he nodded slowly. Got it. He left without another word. At 11:47, the first people arrived. Not into my yard. Near it. Standing outside. Looking in. Phones out. Comments floating over the fence. Nice setup. Beautiful color. Those must be sweet. Someone asked if they were cherry peppers. Nobody answered. Then Brenda arrived. White HOA polo, sunglasses, basket in one hand, clipboard in the other. Like she was opening a ceremony. She stood outside my gate and clapped once for attention. Thank you all for supporting neighborhood sharing. She smiled toward my yard. We are lucky some residents finally decided to participate. People laughed politely. Brenda opened my gate halfway and looked at me. Mind if we showcase a few samples? I stood up slowly and wiped dirt from my hands. Everything is labeled. She smiled wider. Perfect. Then she stepped inside like she already owned the path. Brenda walked the stone path slowly. Not like a guest. Like someone giving a tour of a model home she had already sold. The group followed her. 8 people. Coffee cups. Sunglasses. Phones ready. Nobody asked permission again after the gate opened. They drifted toward the peaches first. Brenda lifted a branch and started explaining how community gardens create stronger neighborhoods. Community gardens. I kept trimming basil and said nothing. Somebody complimented the irrigation layout. Somebody asked if I installed it professionally. Brenda answered before I could. Ethan does nice work once he gets out of his own way. A few people laughed. Then she turned and spotted the pepper bed. Her whole expression changed. Bright color. Clean rows. Perfect timing. She walked toward them immediately. Now these, she said, are exactly the kind of thing people get excited about. One woman leaned in and read the label out loud. Carolina Reaper. She frowned slightly. What does that mean? Brenda barely looked. Marketing name probably. Another woman pointed at the warning tag. Do not harvest. Brenda smiled and tapped the sign with one finger. Everything in moderation. Then she reached down and picked one. Small snap. Clean break. She held it up like a prize. Sun hit the skin and made it look glossy. A few people took pictures. Brenda laughed and said, see? This is how sharing works. She turned to the group and sliced a tiny piece off with a folding fruit knife from her basket. She offered pieces around. 2 people declined. One woman took half a thumbnail-sized bite and immediately grabbed her water bottle. Brenda watched and rolled her eyes. People are dramatic. Then she popped the rest into her own mouth. Nothing happened at first. She chewed, smiled, nodded, kept talking. I kept trimming basil. The neighborhood noise stayed normal another 10 seconds. Then Brenda stopped mid-sentence. Her smile froze. She swallowed and blinked twice. One hand lifted slightly. She took a breath. Then another. The woman beside her asked if she was okay. Brenda nodded immediately. Too quickly. Just stronger than expected. She reached for her lemonade. Drank. Stopped. Drank again. Somebody joked that Ethan grew serious produce. Brenda laughed once, but it came out thinner. She set the cup down and picked up another drink from the refreshment tray someone had carried in. Then another. Her sunglasses came off. Her face stayed perfectly composed except around the eyes. She looked at the plant label again. Actually read it this time. The group got quieter. Nobody moved closer anymore. One guy pulled out his phone and searched something. His eyebrows climbed. The woman who had taken a tiny bite stepped backward and stared at the tag. Brenda stood very still for a second and looked directly at me across the yard. I set my clippers down and walked over at normal speed. She opened her mouth like she wanted to accuse me of something. I pointed at the label, then at the warning sign, then at the basket in her hand. Nobody said anything. The sprinklers clicked on behind us and water started moving softly under the mulch. Brenda looked around and realized every phone that had been taking garden pictures was now pointed at her. Nobody moved for a few seconds. Not because anything dramatic happened. Because people suddenly realized they had been watching the wrong story. Brenda stood in the middle of my garden, holding a half-empty lemonade cup and trying very hard to act normal. Her eyes watered a little. She kept blinking behind her sunglasses. One of the women quietly handed her another bottle of water. Brenda took it without looking away from me. You planted those on purpose, she said. Not loud. Controlled. I nodded once. They are labeled. Silence again. Somebody zoomed in with their phone. Somebody else walked closer and actually read every tag. Carolina Reaper. Extremely hot. Do not harvest. Another small sign under it. Decorative display only. Private garden. The man who had searched it earlier turned his phone around and showed the others. A few eyebrows went up. One woman laughed once and immediately covered her mouth. Brenda noticed. That was the moment something shifted. Not in her. In the crowd. People stopped seeing a community activity and started seeing sequence. Signs. Labels. Open gate. Basket. Photos. Sampling. Somebody asked quietly, "Wait, did Ethan invite us?" Nobody answered. Brenda set the cup down carefully and straightened her shirt. "This is irresponsible landscaping," she said. Her voice came back stronger. People could get confused. I looked at the sign she had tapped 20 minutes earlier. Confused by the warning? She opened her mouth and stopped. A man near the fence asked, "Why were you picking things in his yard anyway?" Another voice followed immediately. "I thought this was organized." Someone else said they had seen Brenda posting about featured gardens all week. The questions started stacking naturally. Nobody raised their voice. That made it worse. Brenda tried smiling again. We were celebrating community participation. Holloway appeared beside the gate, holding his coffee mug. Calm as ever. "Funny," he said. "I never saw Ethan agree to that." More silence. Brenda looked around for support and found people studying the labels instead. Then one of the women from her own board looked at me and asked, "You really put warning signs up before today?" I nodded and pulled out my phone. Pictures. Date stamps. Planting day. Labels visible. Her expression changed immediately. She looked at Brenda but did not say anything. Brenda saw it. That seemed to bother her more than the peppers. She took a slow breath and looked around the garden again. The peaches. The irrigation lines. The markers. The careful spacing. Then she noticed the paper plate still sitting under the peach tree. Peach pits. Half of one missing pepper. Her eyes stayed there half a second too long. I noticed. Holloway noticed too. He looked at the plate and said casually, "Looks like somebody started sampling early." Nobody laughed this time. Brenda picked up her basket and walked toward the gate. Halfway out, she turned back and forced one last smile. "Well, I think we learned something today." She left. The crowd followed slower than they came in. Nobody took fruit. Nobody touched the fence. By evening, the neighborhood group had changed completely. Photos of my signs. Questions about boundaries. Quiet jokes about reading labels. But the post that got the most attention was not mine. Someone uploaded a close-up of Brenda standing under the warning sign holding her basket. Monday morning arrived quieter than usual. No walking group. No clipboard. No basket. The air smelled like wet grass and fresh coffee instead of perfume and commentary. I opened my blinds and looked toward Brenda's house. Curtains closed. No movement. My irrigation app sent the normal alert at 6 a.m. Zone 1 complete. Zone 2 complete. Everything back to routine. I walked outside with my mug and stopped at the fence. Nobody had touched it. The gate sat closed exactly where I left it. The paper plate under the peach tree was gone. Not thrown away. Gone. Somebody had collected the evidence of their own curiosity. I watered slowly and checked the beds one by one. The peppers looked untouched. Not because people suddenly respected gardening. Because the story had changed. They were no longer decorations. They were consequences with labels. Around 8:30 my phone buzzed. HOA update. Community produce exchange postponed pending participation guidelines review. Short message. No signature. Comments disabled. 10 minutes later, another post appeared. Reminder that private landscaping remains private property unless otherwise authorized. Also unsigned. I read both once and put my phone away. Around noon, Holloway walked over carrying a box. He set it on my patio table. Inside were 6 small metal garden plaques. Blank. "Thought your signs deserved an upgrade," he said. I laughed and asked if the whole neighborhood was suddenly into labels now. He looked toward Brenda's house and shrugged. Turns out people read things when they think they might matter. He left before I could answer. That afternoon, I worked in the yard. Normal work. Deadheading flowers. Resetting emitters. Tying branches. Around 3 o'clock, I heard footsteps and looked up. Brenda stood outside the gate alone. No HOA shirt. No basket. Just jeans and sunglasses. She stayed outside. First time all month. She looked at the peach tree. Then at the pepper bed. Then at me. "Those signs were there the whole time?" she asked. I nodded. She looked down once and let out a small breath through her nose. "People are making a bigger deal out of this than they should." I brushed dirt off my gloves. Nobody talked about signs until they had to. She looked at me for a second like she wanted to argue. Then she glanced at the irrigation lines running under the beds. The labels. The clean rows. Everything she had treated like free scenery. She gave one short nod and stepped back. Before leaving, she pointed toward the peaches and said, quieter this time, "Those look good this year." Then she walked away. No speech. No apology. Just left. The next Saturday, I found something hanging on my gate. Not a notice. Not a community sign. A small handwritten card. Nice garden. Thanks for sharing the view. No name. I hung one of Holloway's plaques beside the pepper bed and engraved 6 words. Read the sign before taking anything. After that, nobody reached over the fence again.